All right, it's time to create a message. To do that, I need some handlers. Here I'm going to add a messages.js handlers. I like to keep our models in the singular and our handlers in the plural. Inside of messages.js, I'm going to bring in all of my models. I'll do that by requiring ... models. And remember, this is the same thing as models index.js. And back in my models index, I once again exported out this message. So make sure that you have that as well. That's going to be really important. Now here's where things get a little bit more fun. We're going to export a function called create message. And create message is a function. Once again, it's going to be an async function. It's going to accept rec, res, and next. What we're going to do is actually think about the other functions that we might need. We want to create a message. We want to get an individual message. This is going to be useful for maybe editing. And then we want to delete a message. So we're going to set up these three functions and we're going to take one at a time. Creating is actually going to be the most challenging because when we create, we have to think about the user as well. So what is creating going to look like? Well, like every single async function, we're going to try catch. And what are we going to do inside this try block? We are going to make a new message. So we're going to say, let this message be the result of db.message.create. And inside of here, when we create a message, we have to pass in two properties. We have to pass in some text and some user. Well, the text is probably going to come from rec.body.text. But what about the user? Where's the user going to come from? Well, remember that this is going to be a specific ID. And when this actually happens, we're probably going to have the specific ID for that user. Our route is probably going to look like API/users/some user ID/messages. So we're going to be able to grab the ID of that user from rec.params.id. We'll make this route in a second, but here's probably what we want to start with, some kind of ID messages. What we're then going to do is find that specific user. Let found user be the result of waiting for a user and finding it by its ID of rec.params.id. Now we need to find this user so that we can add a property onto that user. Well, what property are we going to add? We want to add a message to the user's messages. We're going to push in the new message that we made, specifically just the ID. Because remember, every user needs to know what ID of that message, because every user that makes a message should have that ID of the message associated with it. We're then going to save that user. Once we've saved that user, we can send back the message with that user's data as well. So this is going to be a bit of a tricky query, but I want to walk through it step by step. We are going to find a message, db.message.findById. We're going to find it by whatever the message ID is that we got. We could use underscore ID here as well, or just a regular ID. Either one is going to work fine. Now, we can make sure that we wait for this because it is asynchronous. But I want to do one more thing here. I want to populate the user property. And I want to populate the user property with just the username and the profile image URL. And the reason for populating this is, instead of just getting the ID of that user right here, I want to get some properties about that user when I send this back. This is going to allow my API to create a message and send me back that message immediately with the username and the image of the user that created it. If you think about how we're going to start putting these warbles on the page, we're going to need the username of the person who made it, as well as their image, so that we don't have to query the database again in a different request. If this works out well, we're going to send back a status of 200 with some JSON of our entire found message. And once again, if anything goes wrong, we're simply going to return next with that error. So we've made this handler and that's all nice, but we need to actually start using this in a route. So inside of our routes, we're going to make a new file called messages.js. And inside of our messages, we are going to simply bring in Express like we saw before. We're going to bring in our router, which is the result of express.router. And here we need to pass in an option called merge params. And merge params allows us to get access to the ID inside of this router. we're then going to bring in our create message from handlers messages. Now, instead of using our router.get and router.post, we're simply going to use the router.route method. And I'll tell you why in a second. We want to make sure that all of our routes start with just a slash, because we are going to prefix all of these routes with /API, /users, /ID, /messages. Remember, we need this ID right here, which is why we have the merge params of true. So after this entire prefix, I don't really need anything else. And what's nice about that is I can attach any kind of method that I want here. So when there is a post, we are going to call create message. When there is a request here, it's a post, we're going to call create message. So if we head back to our index.js, we should be able to include these routes right here. Instead of auth routes, maybe we'll call that something like messages routes. So we'll say that messages routes is the result of routes / messages. And where are we going to start using these? Well, we are going to include them right over here. Messages routes, and we are going to prefix this all with /API, /users, /SomeID, /messages. So anytime we want to find all the messages for that user, we can easily do it. So let's go see if this gets us the messages for a specific user. What we're going to do is go sign in with this latest user. First, make sure we don't have any errors in our server, and it looks like we do. Ooh, router.use requires a middleware function but got an object. Seems like we're getting this problem quite a bit. And it's happening because whatever we're exporting from our router isn't really working out. And this usually happens when you forget to module.exports the router. So let's go save that. And it looks like we're in business. You're going to make that mistake a bunch. That's okay. I just made it too. So I'm going to sign in with a username of Ellie and a password of secret. And I don't even need the username here. So let's do this so that I can get back the ID. And let's go see all of my messages. We are going to make an HTTP get to localhost 8081 /API /users /that ID /messages. And here we see not found. How come that's not found? Well, do I have a get to localhost API users? I don't. What do I have? I have a post. Remember, inside of my router, I set up this post right here. We'll take a look at that right over here inside of my routes. I have a post. So I'm going to post over here, and I'm going to pass in some kind of text of we did it. Make sure I get those double quotes out of there. And it looks like I actually posted successfully. The problem is we don't really want anybody to just post to anybody else. We don't want any user to make another message for another user. You might not be able to guess this ID, but you could try and you eventually would find the correct user ID. So we need to add the idea of making sure that the only person who can create a message is that user who's logged in. And to do that, we're going to need to start using the token that we saw when we logged in successfully. So one more time, I'll sign in with this information. We're going to need this token right here, specifically this portion. We're going to decode it. We're going to use that information to correctly get the right user.